Today, I come your way again to discuss on this raging issue of tithing. Today, I will take a discussion on paying of tithes. In the last episode, I discussed that tithe is not something we materialize. It's something we should understand across the board, because we see tithing in the commandment of God, both in the giving and we in obedience to the commandment. Tithing, you see 10 commandments. And how do we obey the 10 commandments? By obeying one. You see, in the choosing of a race to reveal God to humanity, how many families does God choose? He chooses one family. That's the Jacob's family. You see, in the issue of even collecting tithes from people, how many families did God choose? He chooses Levite's family or Levitical family. In the choosing of who to collect tithes from the Levite, he chooses one, Aaronic family. So you see, that is it. So, and then I discussed also in the last episode that religion is about sacrifice. In the absence of sacrifice, there is no possibility of worshiping God, because we can only worship God by giving up ourselves. You see, in the existence, nothing fulfills itself living by itself and for itself. Everything fulfills itself by giving up something about itself for what is greater than what it gave up. For instance, you see, animals exist by giving. Lower animals fulfill themselves, their purpose of existence, by giving up themselves for higher animals. Higher animals eat up lower animals, or stronger animals take over weaker animals, and then the habitat or environment or nature continues. You see, it's always like that. The greater rules over the smaller or the weaker. Greater nation rules over takes charge. That's what leadership is all about. It's a matter of the greater, the head leading the body. So that is it. So that sacrifice. Something must give up something to get something bigger than itself. So religion is like that, or worship of God is like that. It's sacrifice. So tithing is fulfilled finally in sacrifice. Sacrifice of obedience, sacrifice of yieldedness, sacrifice of consecration. For instance, I mentioned that Jesus paid tithe when he gave up his will to do the will of God. Because at the end of the day, tithe is about a tent. A tent is a center of your being, a center of something, the nucleus of something. That's the tent, is a nucleus of something. So when you give up the nucleus, you're giving up the totality of that thing. When you give up your heart, you're giving up everything about you. You're giving up your leg, you're giving up your head, you're giving up your hands, you're giving up your ears. When you give your heart, so God doesn't ask to give him your ears and then begin to mention things you should give him, your legs, your hands. Give him your heart. When you give your heart, you're giving your tenth. And when you're giving your heart and you're giving your that tenth, you're giving your all. Because tenth reflects the essence of a thing. All right, now, I want to talk about paying of tithe then. Today is about paying of tithe. The question is, did Jesus pay tithe? I just explained that. That paying of tithe should not be something we limit to material thing alone, or to monetary thing alone, or to maybe agricultural product. Tithe is paid based on what somebody possesses. Tithe is paid based on what you are dealing with. If you're dealing with service to God, tithe is paid in terms of your time. It's paid in terms of your submission to God's will. If you're dealing with maybe you giving and take in terms of relationship with your priest or with your pastor, with your whoever giving you spiritual guidance, tithe is paid in terms of material things for the spiritual thing you've received. So tithing is not simply something we limit to one material thing called money. Okay, now we say, did the apostles pay tithe? Okay, let me finish with Jesus. Did Jesus pay tithe? Did he approve tithe? Of course he did. Of course he paid tithe. He paid tithe one in obedience to the will of God. Because the law of God, we're given in 10 laws, 10 commandments given, and one is required to fulfill the 10. It's the love of the Lord with all your might. Jesus fulfilled that into the letter. He loved God with all his might. In fact, he obeyed God to the obedience of giving his life for the purpose of God's interest, for the purpose of bringing the will of God or the love of God to humanity. Then he also, in the book of Matthew chapter 23, which we are familiar, I'm not following the letters. He advised his Pharisees that he should also add to the tithing they're collecting mercy, righteousness, good deeds. All right, so because it's not just monetizing and say when you pay that you've done everything well, and then you ignore other things. He said add this to this, so he approved it. Did the apostles pay tithe? Did they talk about tithe? Now, number one, I mentioned that tithing is instituted when the religious system is established. When the church began in Jerusalem in AD 33, in 83 AD or thereabout, there was no church organized. There were no bishops. There were no episcopal system. There were no organized structure of people working in the church as an institution whereby they need to be sustained. The church system needs to be sustained. Churches were gatherings of people in the houses and pockets of places like that. So it was just like they were wandering in the wilderness like when they left Egypt. But when the 2nd century, when the church began to be established, bishops were ordained, the people began to work full-time, permanently in those systems. Tithing was instituted. Go check church history, you see it that way. From 2nd century to 3rd century, the tithing became a discussion because the church as an institution had been established. The same thing happened when Moses came from Egypt. He did not collect tithe until they had built the tabernacle whereby they ordained priests to function there. When the priest started functioning, that they were to be given tithe because they were doing permanent services for the people. Now, you said, did the apostles themselves pay tithes? Yes, they did. How do you know? If you look at Paul, if you look at Peter, none of the apostles ignored the law. None of them. In fact, you look at the book of Galatians, the whole book of Galatians was written to denounce those who insisted among believers that people must obey the law of Moses to be saved. That is how much they were attached to the law. If you look at the book of Galatians, also chapter 1, and you see Paul speaking about Peter in chapter 2, talk about Peter. Peter met before people came from Jerusalem. Peter was eating with the Gentiles. Well, when those people arrived, Peter, as he said himself, because of the fear of the Jews, because of the law, they were people that respected the law strongly. And then when they told Paul, then they said when they discovered the grace given to him, they gave him the right hand of fellowship. And then they should go to the Gentiles. So they say you should remember the poor. The poor, remembering the poor was part of tithing. Because when I discuss the next discussion, we talk about tithes of tithing, you see there's tithing for the poor. So you say remember the poor. That was an encouragement for them to remember a portion of their earning was supposed to be given to the poor. That's tithing, because there's tithing for the poor. Okay, so that is the teaching about tithing. So you see, they were encouraged again and again and again to remember the poor. So the poor was an incorporated understanding in the distribution of wealth and earning among the apostles. So it became a principle of management of resources even before the church was established, or the church as an institution was established. So, and you go again, look at the book of Acts chapter 21, when Paul came back, Paul had made a vow that he needed to fulfill in Jerusalem. That's what made him to say he must go to Jerusalem for the feast. So when he came to, in Acts chapter 21, he was purifying himself in the temple. What is purification? Purification is not a New Testament requirement, but he was purifying himself in the temple. That's in obedience to the law. And the law, that's because he had a vow. And there were other brethren with him that had vow also to fulfill. That's to show you how much they were attached to the law. So they could not have ignored the law of tithe and then follow this other law. So whatever the law they rejected and knew was fulfilled in Jesus was the law of sacrifice. So they were not killing animals, but every other law the apostles followed to the letter, which you can see in Acts chapter 15. Acts chapter 15, when the Gentiles had become believers in Christ Jesus, the confusion was, what should we do? Because the apostles themselves had no problem about obeying the law. They knew the laws, tithing laws and all the laws of vows and whatever laws. They knew the laws. But how do we deal with the Gentiles who don't have the law? So that's why they sat down and they had council in Jerusalem. And they said, okay, we should not put a burden on them because they don't have this law as their background. We should tell them they should abstain from things that are sacrificed to idols and from fornication. So they gave those things to the Gentiles because they could not understand the background of the Jews. But the apostles had no problem about the law. Because you see, there was a heavy contention all the time about what to do with the New Testament realities. Should they dispense with the law or should they incorporate it? So, and then they wanted to understand that the apostles were in the process of development. They were not perfect in the understanding of what they should do. They were undergoing growth in their teachings and knowledge of the truth. But they approved the concept of tithe, and that vow is written in the book of Numbers. It is in the same system, the same commandment, the same set of commandments that tithe is given. So if he could fulfill a vow, if he could make a vow in the New Testament, and then he was purifying himself to fulfill the vow, then is it the tithe that is to give a part of his earning or whatever that he could object? So definitely the apostles paid tithe, the apostles approved tithe, the apostle preached tithe, the apostle understood tithe, the apostle practiced tithe. Thank you. I would like to invite you to like our page on Facebook so that we can continue with the discussion. And then you can join us on WhatsApp. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on our social media handles are all there on Instagram. Thank you so much. Till I come your way next time. Bye-bye.